Hi folks, we're going to get started here in just a second. We've got a bunch of people still signing on, so we'll get started in just a minute here.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the National Skills Coalition webinar, WIOA State Plans, Realizing Innovation and Opportunity. Before we get started, we want to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded. Following the webinar, you will receive an email that will include the recording as well as the slides. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions or comments for our panelists, please type them into the question box at any time. We will try to get to them as soon as possible. If you are having any trouble seeing or hearing the presentation, let us know in the question box, and we'll try to resolve any issues you might be having. Now that we are recording the National Skills Coalition webinar, WIOA State Plans, Realizing Innovation and Opportunity, I'll turn you over to our State Policy Director, Brian Wilson, and we can get started.
Good afternoon. This is Brian Wilson, State Policy Director with National Skills Coalition. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. This webinar is part of National Skills Coalition's Realizing Innovation and Opportunity in WIOA series of webinars and publications. Today's topic is WIOA State Plans. I'd like to begin by introducing our speakers. We could have the next slide there. Thank you. With us today is Howard Weil, Deputy Director for Policy and Planning and Special Policy Advisor, the Office of the Governor, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Tim Rainey, Executive Director, California Workforce Development Board, and Ann Kilzer, Director of the Minnesota Workforce Council Association. As you can tell, our speakers represent three different perspectives: the perspective of the Governor's Office, a state workforce development board, and an alliance of local workforce development boards. For today's agenda, I will begin with a brief overview of state plans. This will be followed by a series of questions and responses with our guest speakers. Following that portion of the agenda, there will be time for audience questions, so please do type in questions that you have. Next slide, please. Available on National Skill Coalition's website is a new publication in the Realizing Innovation and Opportunity in WIOA series, implementing the playbook for creating effective state plans. Shortly after the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, WIOA, was enacted, National Skills Coalition published a playbook for creating effective state plans. The playbook offered recommendations on the state planning process, as well as 4 key strategies that are supported by WIOA: sector partnerships, career pathways, cross-program data and measurement, and job-driven investment. This report provides examples drawn from a selected sample of 14 states of how new plans address the recommendations in NSC's playbook. Going over some of the key findings on our review of the 14 states' plans, for the planning process, National Skills Coalition recommended that states should engage in an extensive planning process with broad stakeholder engagement. Plans should be visionary and broadly cover all the major strategies and actions to prepare middle-skilled workers. Our review finds that the planning processes were uneven, with broad, transparent processes apparent in some, but not all, states. Some plans are very visionary and describe a comprehensive workforce development system, while others are more compliance-oriented, just answering the questions posed by the federal departments. In reviewing the types of plans submitted by all 50 states, only 14 state plans include temporary assistance for needy families, 9 include supplemental nutrition assistance program employment training, and 6 include career and technical education. For sector partnerships, NSC recommended the state plan should describe the key elements of sector partnerships that the state will support and explain how the state will administer and fund a strategy that supports the development, convening, and implementation of local area sector partnerships. Our review finds that WIOA appears to have moved the needle forward on sector partnerships. Multiple states with existing sector partnership policies indicate they will be expanding support for sector partnerships as a fundamental way of engaging employers and ensuring that training is job-driven. Some of those without an existing sector partnership program describe how they will now create one. For career pathways, we recommended that the state plan should explain the policies and resources the state will use to create career pathways, including effective adult education approaches, and explain how the state will link career pathways and sector partnerships. Our review finds that many plans, however, lack detail on the steps states will take to establish career pathways. Most plans pay only required attention to integrated education and training. More could have been done to discuss how programs, in addition to WIOA, can play an important part in career pathway systems. States with strong sector partnership policies, however, typically describe the role the partnerships will play in guiding career pathways. For cross-program data and measurement, we recommended the state plan should describe a comprehensive system linking data across workforce and education agencies, measuring outcomes using common metrics, providing a full count of industry-recognized credentials, and offering training providers scorecards for consumers and dashboards and supply and demand reports for policymakers. Our review finds that state plans include new steps for linking data across programs and linking participant data with wage records. The development of cross-program data tools such as supply and demand reports and dashboards, and the use of common measures for programs beyond the 6 core programs in WIOA. However, there's not much discussion of scorecards to provide potential consumers with information on local program results, and state plans generally do not describe the process they will use to identify industry-valued credentials. For job-driven investments, we recommended the state plan should describe how the state will invest in training directly connected to jobs. Our review does find that many states outline the steps that they will take to expand apprenticeship, especially to non-traditional industries and occupations. Finally, for youth, the playbook did not call out youth for special recommendations. Youth, however, can be well served by the key strategies emphasized in the playbook. Our review of the state plans finds that multiple state plans do emphasize youth apprenticeship and other forms of work-based learning for youth. I'd like to now turn to our panelists. I'm going to ask them a series of questions so that we can dive in deeper into what their own state plans have to say about some of these key elements in WIOA. I'm going to first turn to Howard. And the question that I'm going to begin with, first with Howard and then the other panelists, is in regards to sector partnerships. And the question is, in what ways does your state plan advance sector partnerships in your state? And Howard, we need to, you may not have unmuted yourself. We're not hearing you. One moment, please. We're trying to find out what the audio issue is. Okay, while we are working on Howard's line, let's try Tim Rainey. Tim, in California, could you say how your state plan advances sector partnerships in your state?
There we go. Hey, Brian, it's Tim. Can you guys hear me okay?
Of background noise. Make sure everyone else is muted except for you, Tim, and let's try again. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, how's it sound now?
That's better. Thank you.
Awesome. Technology is your best friend until it's your enemy. Thanks very much for inviting me to be on this webinar. This is important work, and we're excited about California. I just want to say we set out our state plan in thinking about how the kind of big chunks of work we want to pull off in California, which would actually encapsulate about 5 years of work, regional leadership and development, which I think you're going to get to, sort of 4 legs of the chair: industry sector partnership development, career pathways and local program alignment, and then cross-system data alignment, all that are very critical. When we started this work a while back, we, in very close communication with the colleges, realized that our many college campuses around the state in a particular region were all focused on different industry sectors. And our workforce boards were doing the same. So we have multiple workforce boards, multiple colleges in one particular region of the state, say the Bay Area or the East Bay, all doing great sector work, but all doing separate sector work. So all working with the same employers, but driving them nuts because they're not coming at it with one voice. So we set out with the state plan to solve this problem. Prior to the state plan, however, we said, look, colleges and workforce boards, you guys got to get on the same page. So we did a lot of work in advance, getting multiple colleges in a particular region and multiple workforce boards in a particular region to work together and target the same sectors, and then figure out ways to communicate with them together. So in our state plan, it's really kind of a recording of this good work that's been going on for a while. We also created in California for the first time regional planning units as required in federal law. Thank you very much. Great tool, WIOA. Regional planning units, and carved up our state into 14 regional units based on labor market data, how industry sectors are organized, how commute patterns and other kinds of things that would help us better understand what a regional economy is. And both the community colleges and the workforce boards are organized within those regional planning units, those 14 in the state. So now with our regional planning guidance, which we just popped out, we're again kind of pushing that regional connection to industry sectors that are driving regional employment. So we're all involved in this kind of calibrating of supply and demand.
I just resent it.
Ann, can you hear me?
Brian, this is Tim. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Tim, you're coming in okay. We're still having some other audio problems that I'm trying to fix.
It might be the Tim and Brian show.
Yeah, she's not muted here. She's not muted on here. So you then close,
So let me try Ann again, or Ann, are you there?
Hi, this is Ann. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you, Ann. So, yes,
Okay.
please go ahead and tell us about Minnesota's sector partnerships.
Yep, we'll get this all figured out in a second. So in Minnesota, I actually work with the state or with the local boards from each of our 16 areas. We have a really close relationship with our state agencies and our state boards, so I feel like I can speak to some perspective about what was written in the state plan because we did have the opportunity to provide a lot of input. So particularly in regard to sectors, Minnesota's state plan had two primary goals, and one was to reduce educational and employment disparities based on race or disability, provide greater opportunity for all Minnesotans. And we see sector strategies as being a really key way to do that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that goal in a little bit under some of the other topics. But the second goal was to build employer-led industry sector partnerships focused on a better understanding of the skills that employers need and connecting skilled workers to those opportunities. So from there, within the state plan, the language around sectors and career pathways actually gets pretty intertwined. But it's acknowledged in our state plan that relative to other aspects of the workforce development system, business services is probably among the least strategically coordinated activities in the system due to the complexities of economic development activities and just the changing nature of what workforce employers need and how quickly that can pivot. But through a more strategic approach designed around sector needs, better coordination and strategies we're hopeful will emerge, and then aligning policy and program changes with that. So one specific example, actually very similar to California, is that it's written to our state plan that the colleges will support efforts of the local boards when they are selecting sectors, and then being really strategic and thoughtful about aligning the curriculum for Perkins and other programs so that we can further develop the regional programs of study within those sectors to address employer needs. And we really also see the fact that there's going to be measurements in WIOA around business services and business satisfaction as a way to incent additional communication with the private sector. And having outcomes, we're hopeful we can point to successes for those businesses when we're addressing those needs and actually have more private sector and industry partners advocating for the system as a whole and the importance of investing in WIOA and our partnerships across other agencies as well.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Okay, let's go back and see if we have Howard. Pennsylvania was one of the first states to implement a statewide sector partnership program. What does your new state plan have to say about advancing sector partnerships? Well, our apologies. We seem to be still having trouble bringing Howard into the conversation. So let's continue with Tim and turn our attention more explicitly to career pathways. Obviously, there's a lot of interaction between career pathways and sector partnerships. But more explicitly, as far as career pathways, what does the California plan have to say?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. So you're right. It does, hopefully, in our plan, and I think it's what most plans are trying to do is have these components kind of hang together, the regional leadership and the sector approach, and then the career pathways. So our plan does emphasize career pathways. We've done a lot of work in advance of our plan and then kind of building it into our plan as an important framework for locals and regions to do the work with an eye on organizing supply and demand. So on the one hand, getting programs to work together in better alignment, facilitating the sharing of data so that individuals can kind of move through a system program to program more seamlessly without having to start over every time he or she gets a new service from a particular component of the system. But the next difficult step, which is part of our sector approach, is then connecting those programs to industry sectors that are driving regional employment and having, again, workforce boards, colleges, and other components of the system identify in concert which sectors and which employers in those sectors they're all going to sort of target with one voice and not driving them crazy. So we've invested in these two things. The coordination regionally, we call it our Slingshot program, which is really about building regional leadership of those employers, again, that are our target employers driving regional employment, and our education leaders, our civic leaders, community-based organizations, and labor. And we've been doing that investment with the regional leadership for the last 3 years. And we call it Slingshot because I'm terrible at branding. You don't normally take a slingshot to a partnership meeting, a weapon to a partnership meeting. But what it meant was a recognition that there's already good alignment going on in regions around the state, and we're investing discretionary funds, WIOA discretionary funds, in ways that will kind of accelerate that work or slingshot those partnerships to kind of a new level of operation. And the other investment we did, both of these things work toward our state plan, are embedded in the state plan, is called the Accelerator Fund, and that's using our relatively flexible money to allow programs on the ground to find innovative ways to accelerate employment for populations that we're targeting, populations with barriers. So using, instead of trying to solve problems with money that they really can't use, having some flexible money to sort of fill gaps to make programs better aligned. So all that to say, it's after the end game, which is getting, again, programs to work together at the regional level instead of just sort of dispersed or fragmented programs, more alignment, and then connecting those programs through a kind of a common regional vision, common goals, common strategies, pathways to those employers that are driving regional employment. We're going beyond WIOA programs, which is, I think we're going to talk about a little bit later, but we are using our WIOA discretionary fund in, I think, very strategic ways that support our plan's focus on regional coordination sectors and career pathways.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tim. I'm told that we do now have Howard on the line. Howard, are you there?
Yes.
Great.
You hear me?
Why don't you tell us what your state plan in Pennsylvania has to say about advancing both sector and career pathways?
Okay. Thanks very much, Brian. As you mentioned earlier, Pennsylvania has, for about a decade, had a well-developed system of regional sector partnerships, which we call industry partnerships. Our plan would expand the system of industry partnerships, both in terms of quantity and in terms of quality, and it would also make those partnerships the central means by which employers engage with the public workforce system. The main way that the plan would expand industry partnerships would be to seek, or have the state seek, additional funding for industry partnerships. We already have a state budget line item for industry partnerships, but the plan would go beyond that. It would require local workforce boards to fund industry partnership training within their service areas, and it would have the state consider the use of a portion of the governor's set-aside and a portion of Pennsylvania's mandatory employee contributions to unemployment insurance as additional funding sources. To make industry partnerships better, the plan calls for instituting a system of peer learning and evaluation to improve industry partnership performance and bring industry partnerships together to share best practices. And it would have the state consider establishing a certification program for industry partnerships as well. To make industry partnerships central to employer engagement with the public workforce system, partnerships are to be involved basically wherever relevant in the workforce system, in incumbent worker training, which they already are involved in, but also in youth pipeline activities, ex-offender training and re-entry to the workforce, and engagement with providers of wraparound social services. And the partnerships are also supposed to be working with our Department of Community and Economic Development's customized job training program, which is used for industrial recruitment, to create a linkage between the two of those two programs. So that's what we're doing in terms of industry partnerships. In terms of career pathways, the two big things we're doing are to first adopt and provide for the implementation of WIOA's career pathway definition, and second, to link WIOA-funded training to career pathways. The way we're doing the first of those things is to include a lot of other partners, education and training partners, as well as other services that are part of that are service providers that are essential to creating career pathway programs. The plan would also require local workforce boards to develop career pathways in consultation with employers, industry partnerships, and educational institutions. And the plan stresses that career pathways are for people with barriers to employment, including people with disabilities, as well as for people without barriers. And linking our training to career pathways, the plan requires that training that's funded by WIOA and training that's funded by industry partnerships, if it is incumbent worker training or on-the-job training, it must be tied to a career pathway. The plan requires education and training providers to consult with employers and industry partnerships and local workforce boards to align career pathways with in-demand occupations. And finally, the plan calls for establishing a state-recognized system of credentials and regionally recognized systems of credentials, and those all also have to be tied to career pathways.
Excellent. Thank you, Howard. So turning to Ann, Minnesota has done a lot of work on career pathways, known for the Fast Track program. What does your plan have to say to advance career pathways further?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's really now interrelated with sector strategies, and we actually kind of had probably more of a focus, as you mentioned, on career pathways before even real formalized sector strategies. So I'm kind of coming at it from a different approach in Minnesota. As you mentioned, the Fast Track program integrates adult basic education, our state colleges and universities, and then the workforce development system, with kind of a key role being a navigator that helps participants participate in the program, and then integrating support services for participants as well to help them be successful. And we've been fortunate that we've had some foundation funding to support our Fast Track program, as well as flexible federal dollars like WIA incentive and state set-aside dollars. And then we have a pretty substantial investment from our state legislature as well. Like Pennsylvania, there's actually an employer contribution that goes into a workforce development fund, which is specifically for employment and training programs in Minnesota. But kind of the next step for us is what we've realized is that this approach, this really specific Fast Track model, works for some of our participants, but not all of our mutual participants. Particularly those who are very low skilled or low English language learners and folks like that. So we're kind of focusing now on the lower rung spectrum of career pathways by building bridge programs that will allow those who do have lower skills to eventually access our more traditional career pathways. So our state plan outlines that Minnesota will seek to achieve these goals by 6 different elements of career pathways: business engagement, community engagement, customer-centered design, funding and resource needs, so kind of continuing to see how we can align the existing resources that we have and what additional resources we might need from other places other than federal and state funding. Again, having our policies and system alignment, both at the local level and at the state level, and then kind of the system management piece where it comes to shared data and some of those kind of more technical issues that tend to be barriers sometimes to working across funding streams, state agencies. And I had mentioned before, Minnesota, despite having a really low unemployment rate compared to the rest of the nation, actually has the highest rate of disparities in educational attainment and employment retention for people of color, which is a huge issue here and a focus of our governor to really try to address. So kind of woven out our state plan and all of these different elements, whether we're talking about sectors or career pathways or even the individual program implementation, there's this real focus on strategies for expanding culturally relevant career pathways. So engaging more of our nonprofit and community-based organizations and helping to address these needs. as well.
Very important stuff. Thank you. Probably a lot of people will be surprised to learn that the disparities in Minnesota are as bad or worse than other states.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Turn over to another subject. I'm going to first address this question to Tim. One of the key features of WIOA is greater opportunities for apprenticeship and other forms of work-based learning, and we know, of course, that's a major push of the current administration, but it's also something that's garnered a lot of bipartisan support. Tim, in California, how does your state plan bring focus to advancing apprenticeship and other forms of work-based learning?
So I'll back up just a little bit for context quickly. So we set in our state plan kind of a big idea of increasing income mobility in the state of California. So the ability of somebody to move from the bottom 10%, for example, to the top 10% in his or her lifetime, something that we've been losing ground on, not just in California, but nationally. So starting with that, we had two big goals around that. The first is increasing the number of middle skill industry valued credentials, actually by 1 million in the next 10 years. And this is something that's very much aligned with the Chancellor's office. So this is the governor's big goals around that, moving the needle on income mobility. And I want to thank the National Skills Coalition for its leadership around helping us understand middle skill demand, credential demand. Maybe more on that later. The second big goal, well, let me just say one more thing about the middle skill credentials. If we do that right, this is the way we think about it in California, if we do the credentials right, and they're really industry valued, in other words, we're producing credentials that are really in demand in regional labor markets so that employers know what they are, they understand the skills they embody, and they want to buy them. In other words, there's a market there for them. If we do that, then it's a good proxy for moving the needle on income mobility. It's a good proxy for the ability of people to actually attach the labor market in meaningful ways. So that's the middle skill piece. The other one is doubling the number of apprenticeships in the state of California. And we've done a lot of good work around that. That's some of it's very mature, and we've been at it for several years. Some of it's pretty nascent. The governor allocated $15 million a year ongoing for non-traditional apprenticeship, non-construction apprenticeship. So we're really looking at expanding apprenticeship in industry sectors where we think there's real possibility for creating formalized apprenticeship. And we're doing this in the context of the sector work that we're driving regionally. So it's not just apprenticeships in banking, although there may be places where that does make sense. But looking at those, again, the sectors that are driving regional employment and thinking about apprenticeship in the context of those sectors and understanding whether or not they fit that particular employer or industry, and then using our resources and plugging those in with those employers in those sectors. So $15 million in a state the size of California is really not that much money, but it's been useful in getting not only focus on sectors where there's a potential, but also reimagining how we approach that from the state level through our division of apprenticeship standards. So it's a big focus. Access to apprenticeship is something we've also been focusing on. We've been funding pre-apprenticeship training in California using the National Building Trades, the MC3, the multi-craft core curriculum. And we've got 6 of these set up in the state with the local building trades councils as the center. So workforce sports colleges, Conservation Corps, other community-based organizations are developing in cahoots with construction crafts pre-apprenticeship that then is feeding apprentices or potential apprentices into crafts where they best fit, where they have most interest, and where there's demand, where there are actually slots opening up. And this has been really successful. The trades love this because it opens up the potential for doing community workforce agreements, because now the municipalities see the trades as an answer to solving poverty or the crisis around disconnected youth. And of course, the local government loves it, and the workforce boards love it because it gives a great pathway to a good middle skill job for the people that we're trying to impact. So there are other things we're doing with state-level investments around expanding access to apprenticeship and then expanding apprenticeship in non-construction sectors. We're also applying for the federal dollars, and I got to give a shout out to U.S. Department of Labor, ETA, for being really smart about supporting states in developing greater capacity around producing apprenticeships in non-construction sectors. It's been really helpful to us.
All right. Thank you, Tim. In Pennsylvania, Howard, what does your state plan indicate the state will be doing to advance apprenticeship and other forms of work-based learning?
Well, the major way that our plan seeks to advance apprenticeship is through creating an Office of Apprenticeship and Training in our Department of Labor and Industry, and that office has been established. And among the things that it does, the plan says it will do, are to provide technical assistance to employers and groups of employers that want to establish apprenticeship programs, including those that are applying for U.S. Department of Labor apprenticeship grants, which are fairly common in Pennsylvania. It would also provide technical assistance to employers and groups of employers that already have apprenticeships and want to improve them. It would train one-stop center staff to understand apprenticeships so that they can advise job seekers about apprenticeships as a training option. It would train business service team members to understand apprenticeships as well, to help employers understand the benefits of apprenticeships better. It would help higher educational institutions in the state register their programs with the Registered Apprenticeship College Consortium. And it would collaborate with other state agencies to develop new apprenticeships, especially those in non-traditional occupations and industries and those that serve non-traditional populations. Beyond that, many of the other ways that the plan supports apprenticeships are similar to ways that it supports industry partnerships. We view apprenticeships in part as another form of sector partnership. So one of the things our plan would have us do is to use employers who participate in apprenticeship programs as a source of information to ensure that industry recognized credentials are really industry valued credentials, and that's something that industry partnerships would also be doing under the plan. The plan would have us seek to identify more sustainable funding for apprenticeship programs, just as with industry partnerships. Would it involve apprenticeships, if they want to be involved, in peer learning and evaluation systems of the sort that we would create for industry partnerships. And it would require our business education partnerships to recruit business representatives from among employers participating in apprenticeship programs, just as it would require them to use industry partnerships as a source of representatives for business education partnerships. And finally, one other thing that we would do to promote apprenticeships is that we require representation on our state workforce board of the Joint Apprenticeship and Training Council.
All right, very good. And are there steps to grow apprenticeships and other forms of work-based Minnesota state plan?
Yeah, so our state plan does acknowledge the need to create kind of an overall roadmap that includes work-based learning and apprenticeships as kind of an intentional connection as part of the career pathway model. But that being said, frankly, from the local perspective, this has probably been more of a challenge than some of those other strategies to kind of get off the ground, despite the fact that it has been such a major push at the federal level and such a focus of this administration. I think some of the challenges in Minnesota is that our apprenticeship programs go through a different state agency than the other employment and training programs, so just that disconnect from the agencies that we're more familiar with and work with more closely. And where apprenticeships land within our state agency structures within the same agency that kind of does all the enforcement for labor laws, things like that. So there's some resistance from employers to some extent, and so really we need to focus on marketing to employers the importance of apprenticeships and ensuring that it's seen as valuable and useful and easy for them, and not a real bureaucratic process, which is what their experience sometimes tends to be with our state agencies. So really working from the local level to promote those. We do have a couple initiatives that have positioned us well to try to scale up this work. We do have one of the federal Department of Labor grants to expand registered apprenticeships. And those industries that are focused on for that particular grant is advanced manufacturing, agriculture, healthcare, IT, and transportation, which are our 5 industries that are outlined in other places in our state plan. And our state workforce agency is actually jointly administering that grant with the Department of Labor and Industry. So just the fact that resources have been available at the federal level is helping align some of those programs to work together to implement that grant. Then we also at the state level have a pipeline project, which is private investment, public education, labor and industry experience, acronyms that everyone loves so much. But the pipeline project was established by the state legislature in 2014 to expand school training and apprenticeship programs. And the Department of Labor and Industry was appropriated one-time funding to convene industry experts, employers, higher education, institution, and labor representatives to develop kind of the competency standards acceptable, so kind of that credentialing piece, common language that was mentioned earlier. But one of the challenges there is, again, like one of the entities that wasn't named in the legislation was the local workforce board. So again, making sure that that connection is made between the other folks talking about apprenticeships and working on implementing in the work of the local workforce board. And then we also have a Construct Tomorrow program where partners with construction trades and apprenticeship coordinators are bringing high schoolers hands-on experience to expose young people to opportunities in the construction trades. So I think in Minnesota, when it comes to apprenticeships, we're kind of a little bit newer on that front than in sector strategies and career pathways, but definitely using opportunities and the encouragement of WIOA around alignment between, you know, different non-WIOA programs to bring that alignment and ensure that things are being coordinated at the local level across all the partners.
Hey, thank you, Anne. I have other questions, but I want to give the audience a chance as well to ask questions. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brooke Dorenzis, our Senior State Policy Analyst, who's been monitoring the questions coming in to facilitate that portion of the webinar.
Thanks, Brian. One of the questions we've gotten is if the panelist states submitted state plans that included TANF or SNAP employment and training. I believe Minnesota and Pennsylvania may have had those programs in their combined state plans. Anna or Howard, do you want to talk a little bit about how your state included TANF and or SNAP ENT in its state plan?
Sure. Pennsylvania has a huge commitment to coordination between programs, both at the high level and at the operational level, and to illustrate that, demonstrate that commitment, as well as to help advance that commitment, we did include the TANF plan in our state plan. And we also originally included the SNAP plan in our state plan. For technical reasons, we had to take it out initially, but we are committed to bringing it back as a plan amendment later on. Those are only two of a number of partner programs that we include as part of our combined plan. We also include trade adjustment assistance, jobs for veterans, the Senior Community Service Employment Program, Community Service Block Grants, and reintegration of ex-offenders. So it was just very natural for us to include TANF, and we hope to re-include SNAP as part of that general commitment to cross-program coordination.
Great. Thanks. Ann, do you have anything to add about Minnesota's combined plan?
Yeah, actually in Minnesota, we're fortunate in that Minnesota is one of few states where human services are actually delivered at the county level rather than at a statewide level. So most of our counties were already contracting with our employment and training providers to provide the employment and training activities under TANF. In fact, in some of our workforce centers across the state, TANF is actually the largest revenue source and funding source coming into the workforce centers, more so than any of the WIOA programs or other required partners. So we were a little bit ahead on that one. What we are focusing on now is trying to better integrate SNAP programs. We've always had SNAP programs operating in Minnesota, but really trying to take better advantage of the federal dollars that are available for match. Because we do have a lot of, I think there was some misunderstanding in Minnesota about what could be used as match dollars in regard to state investments, and we're realizing now that a lot of the investments that the state is making can be used as match dollars. So how do we capture that and then turn around to get reimbursement from the federal level to more fully have a more robust SNAP employment and training program in addition to our TANF services.
Great, thank you. And Tim, I know that California submitted a unified state plan, but that programs like TANF were mentioned in the strategic portion. I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add on that, or if we should move to the next question.
Well, we did not do a combined plan. We did a unified plan because we wanted to do our own sort of combined plan, I guess. We wanted the flexibility to include non-required partners in the way that made most sense for those non-WIOA partners. So our approach to, I would say with TANF, we're unlike our required partners where we're married, shotgun marriage. We're still dating TANF. Maybe we're engaged. But the approach to our partners there, and they were at the table the entire time, they were very much engaged with developing the plan, and they're engaged in the vision and the goals and the big strategies and working things out locally. But we had to come at them, just like we did all our partners, with the question, how can your inclusion in this stuff add value to the work you need to do and add value to getting better employment outcomes for your population? We approached all of our partners the same way, including rehab. And their answer was, yeah, we do want to dance. We'll date you. But we're worried about your sector approach, and we're really worried about your region approach because we don't see ourselves there. You know, we're a county-based program. It's very much about local service delivery. And we said, yeah, that's true. And your local service delivery should be in the context of a regional vision for where the region is going to be economically, socially, so that your programs are connected to those pathways, to those employers that we want to target. So they said, yeah, that is a value add for us. We're having trouble getting good employment outcomes, so we're going to hitch our wagon to you guys. And our start with them is going to be really around the subsidized employment piece. And we think our relationship is going to mature. And as we get into the regional planning, and we just popped out our regional guidance for public comment, we're going to see that connection strengthen.
Great. So staying on this of partnerships, we've gotten a few questions about how any of your state plans are looking at partnerships between Title II adult education and workforce boards to promote career pathway strategies. And I know that you talked already about career pathways being a prominent aspect of Minnesota's state plan. Is there anything specifically that Minnesota is doing on Title II adult education with its workforce board to promote those career pathways?
Yeah, actually in our state statute, it requires that adult basic education have a seat on our local boards and our state boards. So that's one really good connecting piece. In addition to the programming that's going on at the local level that's bringing together multiple partners, is ensuring that our adult basic education folks are represented at that table where so many of those higher level strategic discussions are being had around the role of the workforce boards and kind of which sectors we're working on and strategies and things like that. So I think that has been helpful, having them at the table, not just as a partner, but as an actual member of the workforce board themselves.
Great, thanks. Howard or Tim, do either of you have any perspective on partnerships between Title II and workforce boards around career pathways?
Yeah, we plan to. Oh, sorry. We plan in Pennsylvania to have adult basic education along with other education and training providers involved in helping to develop career pathways. Beyond that, I can't give you much more detail at this point.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just say adult schools are our buddies in California. They're in a big transition now, as you guys at National Skills Coalition know well. We are organizing our adult schools through regional consortia and funding them through the community college system, which is a big change. It used to go through our K-12 system. But what we've done that I think is really going to pay dividends is we've coordinated our regional planning units with the regional consortia of the adult schools and how they're being organized, and also how the community colleges are now being organized regionally. So those all are kind of in the same 14 regions of California, more or less, almost 100% aligned. So we've very close partnership with our superintendent of schools, but also our State Board of Education and our community college chancellor, again on the state plan, the big vision, and we're building that into, well, it's built into our state plan, and we're building that into our regional planning guidance. So it's easy to write a state plan. Operationalizing this stuff at the regional level and local levels is going to be the trick, and we're excited.
Great. So, Brian, we're almost at time. Do we have time for one more question, or do you have a final question that you'd like to ask the panelists?
Well, I want to give the panelists an opportunity to just briefly, if there's any other important features of your state plan that we haven't had a chance to talk about that you would like to share. Now's our last chance on this webinar for you to do that.
Can I jump in, Brian? I didn't want to miss an opportunity to give props to the National Skills Coalition. A big focus of our plan, it's kind of the fourth leg of our chair, is data alignment, and we're investing in alignment of participant data at the state level. Because if we don't do that, we can't get program alignment at the local and regional level. So we're opening a big old can of whoop butt on that in Sacramento, and want to thank National Skills Coalition for providing a great deal of support to California and several other states, along with the Ray Marshall School at University of Texas, Austin, and helping us design a common data system in California. We're excited about that. We're also doing, also with the Skills Coalition help, a dashboard so we can compare programs apples to apples in meaningful ways, so we can better understand what interventions are really helping people get better employment outcomes, and then also identifying where we need to kind of shore up parts of our system. So thanks to National Skills Coalition for all that help and your guidance and your leadership in Washington.
Well, thank you, Tim. Howard, any last words that you'd like to offer?
Sure. Let me just point to quickly to two things in our plan that are especially noteworthy. One is subsidized transitional jobs. Our plan requires local workforce boards to spend between 5 and 10% of their funds to create subsidized transitional job programs. So we're optimistic about how that will proceed. The other thing is that the plan requires us to have, and indeed we do have, and we have had very successful, interagency cabinet-level working group that includes all agencies with a role in workforce development. So here in Pennsylvania, that means not just labor and industry, but also community and economic development, education, human services, corrections, agriculture, aging, and military and veterans affairs. All those secretaries have a seat at the table, and they are a kind of high-level steering committee for workforce development in Pennsylvania, and they played a huge role in helping to shape the development of our state plan. And going forward, we expect that they will play a huge role in the implementation of our state plan as well. I and others from the governor's office helped to convene that group.
Great, thank you, Howard. And then, is there anything that you haven't had a chance to touch upon regarding Minnesota's plan that you would like to add?
I think the only thing I would add is, being as someone who works with the local boards, kind of appreciation to our governor's office and our statewide boards for being really intentional about ensuring that local boards are involved in the discussion and creating our statewide plan. as well as aligning the statewide plan with local and regional initiatives. Our state statute actually requires that 50% of the private industry representatives on the state board have to be members of local boards or recommended by local boards. And so I think the really intentional efforts to align kind of all the way throughout the system, they really acknowledge that a lot of the relationships that are needed through sector partnerships and career pathways are actually happening at the local level kind of organically, or then they may be even at the state agency level, and using some of those as pilot project models that can be scaled up at the state level, and like I said, being really intentional about ensuring that the local system is involved in statewide strategies, I think strengthens our efforts as a whole in the state.
Great, thank you, Ann. So I'd like to thank our panelists. We've said at National Skills Coalition that WIOA is really what states and local areas make of it. There's opportunity, but it really needs actions at both the state and local level to realize that opportunity. And I think we've had examples here of 3 states that are well on their way to realizing that opportunity. I'd like to thank the panelists, and I'd like to thank the audience, and we're going to be continuing our webinars with next Tuesday. We will be holding a webinar on the WIOA regulations that have just come out, which I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar are busy reading, as have we. So next Tuesday will be another opportunity to talk about WIOA. Till then, thank you and have a good day.